Good evening to everybody. My name's John Laker. I'm one of the directors of Marlow Energy Group, and I will be doing the MC work as far as this is concerned tonight. I'd like to welcome everybody and to say that this is being recorded. I'm going to show you a very quick film. It's 90 seconds. If you've seen it before, apologies, but please bear with me. If you haven't seen it, it should be quite good, but we'll just see. Marlow residents are concerned about the climate crisis. That is why Marlow Energy Group, MEG, exists. We have less than 10 years to reverse decades of damage. MEG's mission is to achieve carbon neutrality in Marlow by 2030. So, how do we do this? Sharing solutions with Marlow householders, organisations, companies and schools. Promoting energy saving and renewable energy generation to all. Seeking small and large projects in and around the town. We need you and you to volunteer to share this extremely important work. If you have a little time, some enthusiasm and/or a few skills, please email us at marlowenergygroup@gmail.com or visit our website www.marlowenergygroup.com. We will be delighted to hear from you. We would like to thank both Marlow Bridge Rotary Club and the NFU Mutual Marlow for their generosity in making this video for MEG. Right, thank you for watching that. Did it come across okay?
Yes, it did.
Oh, yeah. Good. Right, the format for this evening is that Martin is going to be talking for a period of time to him, obviously about the subject. Ed is here to back him up with added information, especially as he was at the COP26 up in Glasgow. Because we don't have a huge amount of people here, we'll just do questions by hand, I think, rather than putting them in the chat. Unless you want to put them in the chat, you can. Anyway, that's about it. I'm going to hand over to Martin, but I'm going to go a little bit of an introduction. Martin Fry is a semi-retired energy consultant focusing on the demand side, energy efficiency, etc. His roles include teaching on the Energy Master's degree at City University of London. Martin is also chair of the British Standards Institute. In addition, he's the convener of a working group in Brussels on behaviour change in organisations, engaging all European countries. And he's the honorary president of the Energy Services and Technology Association, ESTA. So he has a lot of hats. So I'm going to put you over on speaker. Over to you, Martin.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction there, John, and a great privilege to talk to you all about where we're going with this and the follow-up to COP26, and it'd be very good to have Ed's feedback on that as well, having presented on what it was heading towards at our last meeting. So yes, I've focused on the demand side very much as part of my career, rather than the supply side. In other words, trying to use energy as efficiently as possible. And a lot of the British Standards Institute work that I do is on international energy management standards, global activities here, which is very good to engage with other countries on all of these issues. So just on COP26, I'd like to start off with a bit of feedback from two very important people that were there. One of them was our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and he said that coal-fired power will become as socially unacceptable as lighting a cigar on a plane. as he accused some nations of dragging their heels on the environment. A central pledge on COP26 was to phase out coal, was to phase out coal, was weakened to phase down by last-minute intervention from India and China, as you may well have seen. He said this was very much a frustrating point, but of course, as we'll see, some good things were decided, but there's still a number of issues that are frustrating and not totally resolved. And the other feedback, again, this is very frank, was from Prince Charles, who I think opened the proceedings. And he said the Prince of Wales had described COP26 as amazing and said the climate change conference produced quite a lot of success, but ... He goes on to say, he also spoke about COP26 in an interview with Sky News, saying always the difficulty, I think, in these exercises is how do you translate commitments into real action? So often in the past, it's been a problem. But this time the problem is we cannot go on mucking about any longer because the urgency is, as I was trying to say, is so great. And I think this is one of the questions and the challenges that we've had with a lot of the ongoing activities on the COP program. We've got targets for 2025, 2035 and ongoing. That's all that we're going to do. Yes, but what are we actually doing now? What's happening this week, next year, as we're moving towards that is not just a long-term target and we've got something else to do at the moment. So some of the feedback I've been getting here is of a positive nature. Over 100 countries have committed to reducing methane emissions by 30% by 2030, which is going to make a significant short-term contribution to climate change. And methane is 80 times worse than CO2. And a lot of that relates to the farming industry. More than 100 nations pledged to end deforestation and land deprivation by 2030. Including countries which contain over 85% of the world's forests. Although Indonesia is backtracking a bit on this, the plans are backed by 8.7 billion pounds public funding and 3 billion private investment. So the point here is to halt the reverse in terms of reducing forests and start increasing the size of forests again. Very important. At least 23 countries have made new commitments to phase out coal power, with larger economies doing so in the 2030s. And over 20 countries have pledged to stop funding overseas fossil fuel import projects by 2022. But there's a lot of potential loopholes in this one, it says here in this summary. India will go net zero by 2070, although the timeline has been criticised. The 2030 plans are the ones that are in place in many countries here. There have also been large pledges on finance and green technology from both public and private sources, funding, and a major focus on new financial reporting standards, incorporating climate action and impact. So a lot of interesting activities there. But all that said, words are just words. And as recent events have tended to prove, arguments are far often broken for reasons of political expediency. It's therefore time for campaigners, activists, industry, and the public to keep pressure firmly on governments around the world and policy sectors to get the action done. So that was a summary at the end of week 1. And now we come on to the overall summary, which is the Glasgow Climate Pact, which has been published as a result of this. And this surprise package at COP26 was the adoption of a Glasgow Climate Pact, an unprecedented, lengthy and wide-ranging political decision towards a more ambitious climate response. This text requests that countries revisit and strengthen their climate pledges by the end of 2022, calls for a phase down of coal and sets up processes towards delivering a global call on adaptation, higher levels of climate finance and finance for loss and damage. Although the text left many disappointed over a lack of balance between the strength of language and action on emissions cuts, relative to finance or loss and damage, the fact that it was agreed at all is a relative novelty for the COP process. And as noted above, there was no mandate for the UK presidency to push through this decision, which did not appear on the agenda for any of the formal proceedings. So the Glasgow Pact is much longer than the equivalent previous documents agreed at the Chile-Madrid Time for Action cover decisions at COP25 in 2019, which ran to a total of just 7 pages and largely reiterated the wording from the Paris Agreement going back. The Glasgow text, which is actually split across 3 documents, weighs in at 11 pages. For the cover decision to the Paris Agreement, plus another 8 pages on the decision under the UN Climate Convention, and 1 more for that under the Kyoto Protocol. Moreover, there's a marked shift in language and specificity. The countries were collectively willing to sign off in Glasgow compared with other earlier summits. So it's just 3 years since COP24 in Saudi Arabia, and the US under President Trump had fought off efforts to welcome the findings of the IPCC, which was their report on the 1.5 degrees C limit we must have. Now the Glasgow text put the IPCC's findings front and centre under the first subheading, Science and Urgency. It recognises that the impact of climate change will be much lower at 1.5 C compared with 2 degrees C, and resolves to pursue efforts to stay under the lower limit. And this puts a slightly stronger emphasis on 1.5 degrees, with the Paris text itself having only said countries would pursue efforts to stay below that rise in global temperatures. The pact then reiterates the IPCC's special report, finding that limiting warming to 1.5 C recognises deep, rapid and sustained emissions cuts, with carbon dioxide emissions falling to 45% below 2010 levels by 2030, and to net zero around mid-century. Now, the point here with a lot of this is that it is dominated by the supply side in much of the debate, because the supply side are the big organizations which have a lot of influence in all of this debate. And the demand side, where I work, is very much smaller organizations with much less impact. And so the demand side, of course, is key, because if we are doing away with fossil fuels, coal, oil and gas, and we're moving across to renewables and other relevant sources, then of course the problem is solved. CO2 emissions have gone. But equally on the demand side, we are wasting a tremendous amount of energy. Many organizations, some would say, are using energy very inefficiently. So if we can work to the demand side measures to make energy use more efficient and cut consumptions, then again, they're making their contribution to the climate change issue and cutting emissions reductions. But in addition to that, of course, on the demand side, they're saving money. So you've got the driver, the short-term benefit of being as efficient as possible to save money. And then the side benefit to that, you could argue, is saving the environment or helping to by cutting emissions. So supply versus demand is a very interesting debate. But we'll come back to all of that in due course. So how much was the demand side recognized in all of this debate? Well, not a great deal, as you may see through the documents and so on. But the governments are required as part of this to rapidly scale up energy efficiency measures and to make that happen much more specifically, which is a very important point. So the breakthroughs as part of this initiative then, on the second day of the World Leaders Summit, Boris Johnson launched the Breakthrough Agenda, described in the COP presidency as a commitment to work together internationally this decade to accelerate the development and deployment of clean technologies and sustainable solutions to meet the Paris Agreement goals, ensuring they're effective. So more than 40 countries signed up to all of this, including UK, US, China, Australia, India, and they endorsed these 5 Glasgow breakthroughs. Collectively, the goals cover more than 50% of global emissions. And the goals that we've got here, power, clean power is the most affordable and reliable option for all countries to meet their power needs by 2030. Road transport. Zero emission vehicles are now the new normal and accessible, affordable and sustainable in all regions by 2030. We'll come back to that. Steel, net zero emission steel is the preferred choice in global markets, with efficient use and near zero emission steel production established and growing in every region by 2030. And steel, of course, is an incredibly energy intensive industry. And then we have hydrogen, affordable, renewable and low carbon hydrogen to be globally available by 2030. And the challenge with hydrogen, of course, is how do you make it? It's not naturally occurring, and you've got to make it with low or zero carbon emissions. And then agriculture is a key part here. Climate resilient, sustainable agriculture is the most attractive and widely adopted option for farmers. So a lot of clear focused issues there, but there was disappointment that the COP failed to provide vulnerable nations with adequate funding to avoid the impacts. And of course, the vulnerable nations will suffer more from the impacts of climate change with weather and flooding and that sort of thing. India moving beyond coal was weakened. They've decided to phase down coal rather than phase out coal in due course. But nevertheless, it was regarded as unprecedented in the UK climate change process to get all these measures agreed and in place as part of that activity. So just summarizing some of the final decisions that were made here, India pledged to generate half its electricity from renewables by 2030 with its net zero target by 2070. 100 world leaders representing 85% forests agreed to reverse deforestation by 2030. And that is a major issue, reversing deforestation and getting the forests growing back again. Methane, 90% of nations representing 2/3 agreed to reduce methane emissions by 30% from current levels by 2030. And methane, of course, is very, very much more damaging than carbon dioxide. It's about 80 times worse than CO2 is. So methane emissions are a major problem for certain industries. 46 countries on coal, 23 of which committed to ending coal production for the first time. Now, the Climate Action Tracker, there were some views clearly, well, we've got a 1.5 degree target to meet. What are we actually going to meet following these decisions? And the International Energy Agency has come up with 1.8 degrees, but the Climate Action Tracker has said it's still at 2.4 degrees. So there is still some way to go in this context. The scaling up of solar is expected with $1 trillion global investment commitment to 2030. The race to net zero commitments comes from all sectors, as diverse as the music industry, consumer goods, world travel and tourism, as they belatedly start to acknowledge the essential threats to their sectors. And the International Labour Organization is now looking at how to replace 6 million jobs that are directly dependent on coal, oil and gas and other high-emitting sectors to ensure a just transition. And then we have the Clean Cities Construction Coalition with Steel Zero and Concrete Zero, which was launched as part of C40 cities, along with a host of other net zero pathways. So quite a lot of interesting things going on, and that's going to be more focused on in Egypt next year. So just some other notes as part of all of this. Australia, I was talking to a very old friend by Zoom yesterday who lives in Australia. Australia doesn't use coal, he was telling us, but it exports an enormous amount of it to India and China. And they make a tremendous amount of money doing that. So why shouldn't they stop is a question hanging in the air, but it's still hanging in the air. As far as transport is concerned, we have cars, of course, phasing out of fossil fuels. We know all about that, electric vehicles coming in. We're making significant progress in this country on that. But as part of this debate, Volkswagen, BMW and Toyota have declined to meet that 2035 target. But interestingly, much of all this thinking, of course, going forward is lateral thinking and imagination. And you may have seen, I don't know if you can see this picture from my picture, a gentleman in his best suit in a kayak, thinking laterally. And the quotation here, this was in a paper about a week or so ago, battling traffic for 80 minutes in a car every day drove Mark Webber mad. Now the eye surgeon from Solihull takes a more peaceful route to his Birmingham office, paddling a kayak on the city's canal, gets him there in half the time. So a bit of, lateral thinking here. Just think of some other way of dealing with it. So he's going to work by canoe every day. So financial support is doubling for developing countries, 2019-25, but still some way below. $70 billion I've got per year developing countries need, and we're some way below meeting that target. But just coming back on a few final points here, one of the key elements that's developing now internationally, and certainly in the UK, is behaviour change, and just getting people in their lifestyles and their workplace to recognise the environmental implications of what they're doing. And my association, ESTA, the Energy Services and Technology Association, we've set up the Energy Conscious Organisation certification scheme a year or two ago, where organisations are externally verified and certified to be engaging with the environment through behaviour change. So whatever you do in this business, okay, if you're running a steelworks, incredibly energy intensive, or just sitting in an office, okay, you've got your day job, but you've got responsibilities for the environment. So making sure when you leave your desk for lunch, your computer's turned off, the office lights are turned off, and you've got to make sure everybody is doing that. And that verification process checks that that is happening. And then I've got the pan-European work, I think was mentioned earlier. I sit on the Sector Forum for Energy Management Committee in Brussels, and we have some work going on there looking at how all European countries are addressing behaviour change. And that's been on hold because of the lockdown, because a lot of the behaviour change work, you do need to sit down together and talk to people. You can't do it on Zoom very easily, but we shall get back to that. And very different cultures in different countries. So we can't have a European standard, you must do this, because it depends on the culture in your country. So some interesting challenges. But we do have the global standards I'm also involved in. We have ISO 50001, which is the independent international energy management standard, and organizations are certified to that they're managing energy, and it's been externally verified that they're using it as efficiently as they can. And of course, many organizations then use the logo they get on their letterheads and their websites. Why would you want to engage in business or buy anything from an organization that is not absolutely engaged to energy and environmental management? And that's certainly something which is growing. So you've got a two-way process here. The energy management work I've been involved in has been going on for decades, getting organizations to be as efficient as they can. But the message that isn't coming out, and we're trying to start pushing for that, is, okay, fine, doing a great job at work, but when you go home, what are you doing at home in terms of your personal life, your home life, for energy and the environment? Start to think about that and make links to what you're doing at the workplace. Then you've got the opposite flow to that. And it's great that in recent years, we've now got the local community energy groups. But you'll know there's a number of these around the country. And near where I live in Hurley, we've obviously got the Marlow Energy Group. We've got the Royal Borough Climate Emergency Coalition. And I had a meeting with Dave Scarborough from there. He said he was going to join tonight. I'm not sure if he has. I had a meeting with him the other day about some ongoing activities. We have Green Henley. But in our village, Hurley, we used to have the Hurley Village Association, but that wound up about 10 years ago for various reasons. And I'm certainly planning to have an event early in the new year to re-establish that. And the Royal Borough's Climate Emergency have agreed to come and give a talk to that. And hopefully that the Marlow Group and Henley Group will, and we can decide how to engage or set up or whatever. So it's very much a two-way flow now, from initiatives in your home life. Well, okay, when you go in the office, what's going on there? You're doing a great job at home now. belonging to these local groups. But what's going on in the office? How well are they managing energy and doing things? If not, they should be doing something. So we've got a lot going on here in the wider context, which is partly been driven by the build up to COP26 and the vision that's going to create. And of course, that was delayed for 2 years. We now have the Egypt one coming up next year. So a number of the follow-on activities from COP26 will be focused in Egypt. So the whole debate will continue there. So I think, in my view, it's been a very interesting time to go through this process. And it's also been very good to see the local groups we've got now engaging in all of this, in all activities. So I think the vision for the future for our children and grandchildren is a lot better than it might have been, but there is still quite a lot that we can do. So I think that really summarizes what I was going to say. I'd be interested in any comments or feedbacks, or whether Ed's got anything to add to that.
Yes, thank you, Martin. Much appreciated. We've got 2 comments in the chat at the moment, one from Henrietta. Can you read that, Martin, or do you want Henrietta to read it out?
If you could read it out, Henrietta. I can have a look at the chat. Let's have a look, see if I can find it.
Need to unmute. Okay, so there's been a lot of emphasis locally and sort of in the press about what the citizen can do. You know,
Yes.
We've got to change this and change that. So I'm very interested in your emphasis on energy demand and energy efficiency, because of course if we use it better and don't waste it, we don't need so much. I just wondered what your view was on the balance between what industry must do, including agriculture, and the domestic issue, because many things, as an observer, many things that we're told we have to do are beyond the financial reach of a large amount of the population. So retrofitting a house costs a fortune, as would fixing an energy. So who needs to do what to make the biggest difference? I know it's been said that the government was tackling what was used domestically, or that's what was said. 26. What do you think realistically the man or woman in the street can do? And is it actually industry that needs to make the biggest changes?
Well, I think it's a balance, really. I mean, you've got working in commercial industrial organizations, you're looking at measures that you can put in place to use energy more efficiently, and you have a payback on that. In other words, what's it going to cost and how many years is it going to take to recover that amount of money? And if the payback is 1 year or 2 years, it's probably a very good investment. If it's 5 or 10 years, it certainly isn't. So in an industrial or commercial situation, there'll be a list of things that you could do. There'll be those that you should do and those that you really can't justify doing. And a similar context, I guess, in the home, I mean, there are certain very low cost measures you can take to make your home more efficient, cutting out draft, for instance, turning off lights, making sure things are turned off when you don't need them, and the heating system particularly. You know, when you're going out to work all day, making sure the heating is turned off, and you can have controls these days that will do just that for you. But equally, in the home, of course, there are much more expensive measures like doing cavity wall insulation and other things that you may find the cost and the payback is just something you can't afford to do. But equally, as I was saying, we used to have a Hurley Environment Group a long time ago, and that was a time when the Royal Borough, the local council, would provide advice to your home. So you would have someone would come to your house and talk to you about the age of the building, how much you've got, how much money you've got, what you could sensibly do in your home. And that then all came to an end for various reasons about 10 years ago. And that's why we wound up the group I mentioned earlier. So again, that is the sort of advice that homeowners would benefit from. If you're a poor household, there's not much more you can do than just making sure things are turned off when you don't need them. If you've got a lot of money you could spend, you know, put in a ground source heat pump, get rid of this, invest in that. So there's a whole range of things that you can do, and you just need that advice on what the best way forward is.
Okay,
So
Martin.
clearly industry and commercial, you've got consultants out there that provide you that advice. But in the domestic sector, of course, yes, the consultants are there. I mean, you certainly couldn't afford to pay for their services to come and do something in your home, perhaps.
Okay, thank you, Martin. I suppose the simple answer is keep doing the lottery. But anyway, Dave Faulkner put a comment in saying we should also address this problem to councils, and that conveniently leads us into the position of introducing Ed Gemmell, Councillor Ed Gemmell, who will add his viewpoint from his visit to COP26. Over to you, Ed.
Great, thank you very much, John. And Martin, excellent summary of all the documents. I mean, in more detail than I would have done. So, and my view very much comes from actually having been on the ground there. And I preface it by, it won't be pretty by what I'm about to say. So on the positive side, methane and coal were addressed in the documents and the agreements, which they hadn't been before. So two of the biggest worries that we have is now at least out there.
Yeah.
But the commitments are utterly pathetic and will not help us at all. But at least they're in there. Yeah. The next bit, as Martin mentioned, is that we're revisiting all of these commitments over, every year now instead of every 5 years, which again is a great opportunity for revisiting again in a year's time. So everyone will be looking over their shoulder about what they need to do. Apart from that, I can't report back with great positivity from COP. A few anecdotal things before a bit of an analysis is I did get an opportunity to put a question to the Minister of Environment from China at COP, and I just stood up and said, 2060 is pathetic, and can you tell us how China can get further forward? To which his reply was a list which started with, China has the most electric vehicles in the world. China has the most electric buses in the world. China has the most electric vehicle charging points in the world. And he just continued. And so on, yeah. And that was it. And it wasn't a debate, so I couldn't obviously go back to him with any comment. That was it. The most depressing part of the whole event was on the last day, but not the last, the extra day, sitting in the plenary, and we're in a room next door. So all of the bigwigs are in the main auditorium, but there's two massive auditoriums. We're looking at the screens, all the NGOs and people. And to hear all of the negotiators and some of the leaders getting up to say that we are keeping ourselves on track for 1.5 degrees, when within the document, and I'm sure Martin has read all the text, but within the document is the bit, Martin even noticed it when he just said, is that there is the text in the document they're signing says, currently, if we follow all the current nationally determined contributions, we will raise greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 by 13.7%, when we know, as Martin just mentioned, we have to reduce them by 45% by 2030. So they're out projecting an image that we're going to be safe, when in fact they're signing a document that notes we are well off the target, totally devoid of any understanding of what they were signing, or they just wanted to project to everybody they'd done a good job and we were safe. I mean, that was very depressing, so I didn't stay right to the end. But then the circumstances of it are that between 1.5 and 2 degrees, we lose the tipping points, which are hardly discussed. They are virtually just mentioned. And within those tipping points, I don't know if I mentioned it last time, but you've got the methane release from the Arctic ice and the permafrost, which, depending on who you listen to and etc., but every single scientist now says that this is a methane bomb and will have a massive effect on warming on its own. I questioned a number of scientists who were not people I knew, so I walked up to them after some presentations to ask if they agreed with the general feeling about the methane bomb, which is that we could, over a few years, once the melting is at such a point, see global temperatures rise anything between about 0.5 degree and 4.5 degrees almost instantly in a very short period of time. It's not 100%, but the majority say it's going to happen between 1.5 and 2. And that will cause vast devastation on the planet in the short-term future, with billions on the move, because they won't have they'll be desertified all the areas of agriculture, the water will have gone, and they will have to move and share half the planet that the rest of us are on, as we are under pressure from agriculture, water shortages, and everything else at the same time. And that was largely ignored at the COP. We were saying it, a number of other scientists saying it in presentations, but it was largely ignored. Now, I don't want to scare everybody to your core, but I feel it's better that you hear what was said rather than not hear it. But one of our most eminent scientists and pretty knowledgeable about climate change, he did an event which I wasn't at, and he made a presentation in which he said he believes, from his reading of science, that by the end of next century, the planet will have warmed by 20 degrees. 20. Now,
20.
Now we got calls from that because of being scientists warning, and people knew we were in touch with scientists to say, is that what he said? Is that what he said? Is it true? And I rang Sir David King to ask him, and I don't ring him like I'm not a mate of his, but I rang up because we were getting calls and said, is that what you said? And he said, that is what I believe, is that by the end of the next century, 20 degrees of warming. Now, I haven't got the background. I don't know how he worked it out, etc. So I can't tell you, but he's, it's like the doctor telling you you've got a medical problem. He's one of the people that we should be at least worrying about his opinion. Now, if that happens, nothing will be surviving on the planet that we regard as life. Okay, so
it's a bit frightening. Yeah,
huge. I mean, but to be honest, it was already frightening at the fact that the methane bomb could add over a couple of years 0.5 degrees, 4.5 degrees of warming. I mean, that's a massive jump up from where we're at the moment with chaos ensuing. So it was terrifying what came out of the COP in the level of inaction, coupled with these very big dangers which are largely ignored within things, only a small reference to tipping points. So that was really terrifying. And what it convinced us, and I met and sat with plenty of the scientists as well and quizzed them on stuff, is that the only safe target globally for carbon zero, real zero, not net zero, is 2030. I mean, it's what Marlow's got as a target, as do other councils and cities. It's a target accepted by many. But Tim Jackson, the economist from Surrey University, a lot on carbon budgets and everything else. We did an interview with him. We talked to him again afterwards. And I said to him, so Tim, you believe that we have to be net zero by 2030. Can you tell me what that means on a linear basis to get to 2030? And in the press conference, he went, no, Ed, it's carbon zero by 2030. And it's not linear. It is a massive hockey stick drop now and a tapering off towards 2030. That is all that's going to keep us safe on the carbon budget. So where we are now is we have a world heading at 2050. And I also had a speech on Zoom by Theresa May, lauding Britain's targets of 2050 and how well Britain is doing. And we must accept that within the G20, Britain is probably the best.
Yeah,
it's the best of a pack that are running at the wrong speed. So they're out running. They've got this leading pack of G20 countries running a marathon, trying to break the world record, but they're really off the pace, and none of them are going to make it at the moment. And Britain's at the front of this little pack, but it's not going to make it either. And we desperately need a major G20 country to break from the front, to forget international agreements and everybody doing it together and prove they can do it. Go for that 2030 target or earlier, 2028 ideally, but 2030 target, get to carbon zero and show the rest of the pack they can do it. If they break from the front, just like in a race, if one of them breaks from the front running to win the marathon and they're going to go for it, suddenly 2 or 3 others break behind. Then it starts with lots of them trying to get there. And we desperately, desperately need that. Now, my biggest feeling at the only time I felt reasonably safe in the whole conference, I don't mean personal danger, I mean as in global problem, was when I was at the City Hall of Glasgow, as they had an event for council leaders and mayors from all over the world. And I sneaked in by the back door, being a councillor with the local government association. I was sort of sneaked in under cover of somebody else. But anyway, the speech there was, we heard the provost, so the mayor of Glasgow, Plus we had the council leader from Glasgow talking about Glasgow's 2030 target for the whole community, and almost a fist-shaking moment where she was saying, we're really going to make it. And I did go up to her afterwards and said, how do you think you're going to make it? And she said, well, I'm not really sure, but we're going to have a really good try. And that's what we need from Britain as a country, or from Scotland, and then England and Wales and regions. We need to have that kind of action. Otherwise, we are all not going to survive. I mean, it was really like that. The things that are being missed out at this conference were total survival of anything on the planet.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I can't say I could make you happy or anything else. It's just Martin gave you the summary of everything, and I'm trying to give you the sort of the bits around the edges that were completely missed out, and the interpretation of it. And we have got to find the courage, and that's so as the Marlow Energy Group, it's as a leader in Marlow to lead Marlow across the line at 2030, and for Hazelmere to do the same, and to change what's happening at Bucks Council to do it, and Lord, people like Glasgow are doing it, and every one of us that does it makes it easier for Britain to try and do it. And if Britain does it, we can maybe get the rest of the world to follow. Now, I don't feel very positive.
Okay, thank you, Ed, much appreciated. We're aware that Martin's got to shoot off.
I've got to shoot off in a minute. So any further feedback, I'll be interested to hear.
Any
ongoing discussions. But a very good point, Ed, there.
Yes, thank you, Ed. Any questions for Martin before he goes? I see Dave had something in the chat. Do you want to say that, Dave? Oh.
It wasn't really a question for Martin. It was just a sort of follow-up to what Ed said. And I went to COP as well, actually, but I saw yet another view of it. I went to the unofficial COP, all the sort of outside the blue zone and the green zone bits. And the people you see there are very, very inspiring.
Okay, sorry, I've got to go. Sorry to interrupt. I've got another meeting to go to. Catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Martin. Cheers.
Good, Martin. Thanks.
Carry on, Dave.
So it's the talks you see outside are basically telling you the truth, which is, well, effectively what Ed has just said, is that the ambition within the blue zone was just absolutely missing. They're just missing the point completely. And if it's going to happen, it's got to start happening locally. And as you said, the only thing we can do is do as much as we can locally, and hope that that's enough to get enough of that sort of action around the country that stimulates the government to actually do something properly and positively to provide necessary funding to make it happen. So that's why my comment was, you've got to get local councils to lead. The best thing you can do is protest to your local council to do something, get its plan in place, carry out its plan, engage with groups like Marlow Energy Group and Hazelmere and Windsor and such like, to actually start making things happen. Because nothing is happening. All this planning is great. All these targets are great, but they're not actually doing anything. The government's put no money in to make anything happen. Its net zero target's a joke. Its net zero plan's a joke because it hasn't put any money in to make it happen. Nothing. It's done nothing to actually make a difference. So you've just got to carry on locally and build the group and try and get more buy-in to it. How we do that, very difficult.
I think I take I mean, you're right, Dave, on all of it. So, so there's no dispute on all of it. I think that the one thing I would just say, inside the blue zone, they weren't all wasters. I mean, there are 1,000 or 2,000 really active people who really get it, but they're in a minority.
Yeah, okay.
They are running around being really active inside, trying to get the action from all the others. So it's not a complete waste in terms of the intensity of having all these decision makers surrounded by a bunch of people who really know what they talk about, trying to make it happen. So in a sense, there's some stuff happening, but overall, we didn't get the result from it, even though of all that activity. And I did, we bumped into each other, but I mean, I did go up and spend a bit of time telling anybody I met from Extinction Rebellion actually to you know, that although I'm not going to sit on the street, that
Pump up the volume.
well, no, to say to Extinction Rebellion, look, keep going. I heard it on the doorstep 300 times in the council election when I got elected, that people would have 1,000 door knocks, about 300 we talked about climate, and all 300 pretty much told me how much they hated Extinction Rebellion and then how worried they were about climate and wanted to talk to me about it for 20 minutes. So I kept having people say, this is what, you know, this is essentially what Extinction Rebellion's been trying to do, is raise the awareness, get the conversation going, etc. And it wasn't a popularity contest. And then it gives somebody like me the opportunity to then come in and have those conversations and stuff with people. So absolutely vital. And it's not just that, it's the strikes, the marches, are absolutely vital. But it's well beyond what we've been talking about. I mean, I've got a bigger understanding now, from what I saw and what I heard sitting with scientists. And I mean, I sat with this book here, if I can show you one of the scientists I sat with, a guy called Paul Behrens. He's written a really good book. Hang on, I'm going to find it and show it to you. Where is it?
I have seen your hand, Martin. I'll come to you in a minute.
So this book, I would recommend as a real. I'd only read half of it by the time I got there, and I haven't finished it. But Paul Behrens was there, and I sat with him and a political governance scientist, Victoria Hirth, and these are people working on it all the time, and they are talking about how they spend. I mean, this guy said when he came to spending his last 2 months putting his book right, and he talks about areas and if we really take action that we're promising, and if we don't, how good it will be and how bad it will be. But the good isn't good. The good is already really quite bad. And he said when he was having to sanitize the book to give this impression, by lunchtime he was paralyzed in fear every day for 2 months, and he couldn't work in the afternoon, and he had to wait until he'd got ready and work again the next morning. And talking to him, he really, really, you know, gets his stuff. We're at the point now where it isn't 2050 is we're gonna burn. We're really gonna burn. The urgency is in these next 5 to 7 or 8 years to change globally what people are doing, to pull us back from the precipice, which we are hurtling towards. And even all of our promises don't pull us back, even if we do them 100%. Dave said, do we trust them to get to net zero 2050? Well, actually, no, you know, but we don't even trust them to get to the wrong target. You know, we've got a huge thing. So we have, I mean, Extinction Rebellion, climate strikes, local community work, but we need leadership. We have got to get, and in this country, I'm afraid to say, and although recent events suggest it may not be true, that the Conservatives will be in power for the next 6 or so years. There's things happening, who knows, but if it looks like that, we've got to get the Conservatives at every level, particularly in government, to take this seriously and get us a 2030 target. Otherwise, there isn't going to be a planet left. It's a survival issue now. It's not just about the chaos that's coming from climate change.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. Martin Blankel has had his hand raised for about 10 minutes now. So your question, Martin.
Thank you, John. I have read that the world population is likely to increase from about 8 to 10 or 11 billion by the end of the century. Now, working on the simple assumption that the per capita energy use will rise in proportion to the number of people on the earth, I had expected to read in the press, although I know I can't rely on it, that COP26 would major on population increase and the obvious knock-on effect. But I read nothing. I saw nothing anywhere. I didn't hear anywhere on the news anybody say that if the world population increases, it's a fundamental major factor. And who's doing anything about it? Well, we can talk about reducing coal and more wind and all the rest of it. But I mean, if we don't reduce the population of the Earth, again, we're heading to extinction.
You're absolutely right. Within the scientists' warnings, it's one of the 6 stresses on the planet. So it's recognized. We are a bit of a favorite for population activist groups because we're one of the only sort of major groups that has it in right up there with all of the other issues, and it's taken seriously. What I would say is that time is so short now, you know, that the action to take us into an area where we really can survive, and I'm not talking about it being easy, but survive, is in the next 5, 6, 7 years. That's the thing. And all the action on population we can take in that 7 years will not help us, will not have the biggest effect of all the things we do in the next 20 or 30. But if we don't, it's like planting trees, population of planting trees, you've got to start now, so you see the effect in 20, 30, 40 years time. You can't leave it and start trying to do it then when it's even worse. So you're absolutely right, and it was totally left out of the COP. And we mentioned it in a number of things, and there were 1 or 2 others trying to mention it, but it's left out. I mean, I would say that interestingly, I bumped into at an event Stanley Johnson, so Boris's dad, and he does keep mentioning it. So he's one of the people that sort of mentions it, and he did mention it again at the event I was in.
He mentioned it to his son.
I'm not sure it's even himself. I think it is the same issue, but but I mean, no, I mean but he does. He's not shying away from mentioning it, and obviously he's got a political voice, but totally minor in the COP sense. Yes, it's dangerously ignored, because even if we solve the rest of it, it'll come back to bite us in 20, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing for Martin? Population expansion is obviously a huge concern, but we should be concerned with the expansion of populations in developed countries, not in non-developed countries, because 1 extra person in America is equivalent to 100 additional people in Africa, because that American uses 100 times more energy than the African person. So we've got to consider what we're talking about population, whether we're talking about population in general or the worst culprits, as it were. Anyway,
we've got to have a managed decline of population right across the board. And you're absolutely right. Consumption is so high in the West that we need to have it happening here more potentially than in other countries.
Right, any more questions? We're approaching our 8 o'clock period.
Oh, gosh.
Well, there are no more questions. Well, while you're thinking about it, let me put a quick advert up. This is for our next talk, which is this one.
What I could do just at the end, John, is we have the film that we issued at COP26, which I can just play to you, which is about 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, fine. Can everybody see that advert for the Qbot?
Yep.
The little robot that's on obviously the 8th of September, a Wednesday, sorry, 8th of December on a Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Please come along if you can. That should be a very interesting talk. If everybody's happy, can we run Ed's film? Everybody happy with that? Yeah, good.
So if you want to make me a co-host or something, or allow me to share.
I think you're allowed to share already.
Okay, right, I'll try. And this is the film that came out, the paper issued that was created before the COP, which is about 3,000 signatures now. And anybody who's a graduate scientist can still sign by going to our website. Right, let me then try and get this film. Hang on, okay, 1 second. Yeah, share screen, right. Right, hang on, I'm just going to tee it up again. Right, got it. Okay. Then I have to make sure I get on the volume before we get started. Okay. Sorry, where's the little thing for showing that I've got the sound on? I'm trying to find it now. Oh yeah, there, I've got it. Share sound, okay. Right, okay.
Oh, I wish I knew before. I wish I knew much earlier on.
I wish.
If I had known.
When I came into it, I was just like, yeah, we're going to change all this. We're going to stop offshore drilling. We're going to make sure that this environmental agency stops allowing chemical facilities to pollute in lower income Black and Latino neighborhoods. And then realizing like, oh, people have been actually working on that for decades. I'm just new to the game.
had been longing for seeing scientists get their hands dirty, get into the crux of the matter, get into the eye of the storm.
We are not yet able as a scientific community to help grab our fellow earthlings by the scruff of the neck and say, come, we are heading into big changes.
I wonder a lot about whether being a scientist is the best thing to do in the times of these urgent environmental crises.
So it's only immediate, rapid and far-reaching action that's going to keep 1.5 degrees within reach.
For how much longer can you shout louder in more dramatic font? We need to rethink the fundamental assumptions of what we're doing.
These times are going to call on us to be the best people that we can be.
We have to translate our outrage, our fears, our anxieties, our grief about what's happening into action.
I myself have realized how hard it is, even for one person that gets into government and wants to pursue a transformative agenda, to do so alone.
It's really, really important, I think, that we support each other to take political action.
If you want to take climate action, you can. You don't have to be perfect. The world isn't on my shoulders. It's not on your shoulders. It's all of us together.
We understand enough. We understand plenty. All our problems are fundamentally political. They're fundamentally about people. They're about our institutions. They're about our governance.
It's time to stand together to face down corruption and vested interests.
We need to let go of things we've gotten so accustomed to, so familiar, so dependent on for a long time, including not just habits and behaviors, but ways of thinking.
Visionary leadership doesn't come out of the sky. It needs to be team play at its best.
Changing the time horizons upon which we make decisions is really a big and important part of this. Yes, scientists are critical to this equation, but so is everybody else.
It's like a two-way process. I have to listen to lots of people because there are lots of things I don't know.
I used to think that things would just happen maybe by magic, but you made the change happen by walking the talk.
For many years, I felt that I was just saying, the world doesn't have to be this way. We can change it. Only in the last 5 years, I've felt that we can say we are changing it.
Together we can and must succeed.
You are the people who make the difference.
Be courageous.
We want to do whatever we can.
The choice is in our hands.
That's it.
Thank you, Ed. Good film. Right, any more questions before we shut up shop? Could I just ask a quick question to Ed? One of the problems we've got at the moment is what I think Martin was saying about Australia, i.e. they're not using the coal, they're just producing the coal and other people are buying it, they're using it. And the same goes for the oil companies and the gas companies. They're producing for a need which you, I, and everybody else tend to use. Who is the villain here?
I might put the answer on what the solution is on its head rather than saying who the villain is. And it goes back to a talk I heard at COP, actually, by a whole load of Conservative leaders, including an Australian MP and Amber Rudd, where all of them were talking about market forces were going to solve the climate crisis for us. And they were talking about the ramping up of renewables and how we're all wanting to buy it and how it's getting cheaper and this sort of thing. And they were all talking about 2050 as well. But I got up and said to them that 2050 is the wrong target. And I explained why. And then I said, it's absolute balderdash that market forces are going to solve the climate crisis. I said, it doesn't matter whether you pick COVID or the war, but in the war, Churchill and the government went in and dealt with the big stuff, and then market forces nibbled around the edges helping. And in COVID, Boris Johnson's government eventually went in and did it. And again, market forces helped accelerate some of the other bits and pieces around the edges. It's not the people or the producers. We have got to have leadership that is moral, that sees what we need to do for the survival of humanity, that takes the right decisions. And when they do, they will tell the market how it's going to be regulated at the beginning. And then after that, it will fall out and we will see a change in both the suppliers and those who are purchasing it. So my belief is we've got to have it done by the leaders at Cllr.
So it's really the politicians getting hold of the multinationals to do what everybody wants.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing though is we have to recognize that we're all already preaching to the choir, to each other. We all want it, but there are many people out there who don't want it, because many of them don't realize the predicament we're in as humanity. And there's a lot of communication on how difficult that predicament is and how urgent the action needs to be.
Right. Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, can I
ask just a little follow-up to what Ed was saying? What would be the top, say, 2 or 3, or 1, if you like, thing that would be, you know, getting a grip, reading the Riot Act to the markets rather than relying on the markets? Would it be an economy-wide carbon tax? Would it be a carbon border adjustment? Would it be banning things? What would be the 2 or 3 things that, if you were Prime Minister, you would do in the next couple of years?
Number one is to simply recognise the situation. It's about survival on the planet of us and everything else. Number 2 is fix the right target. So from a carbon net zero, it has to be 2030 carbon net zero. And then you come to the detail, which is what you're asking. And the number 1, super simple, easiest one to do, which lets the market then actually do something, is take away all the subsidies on fossil fuels, every single one. Market will immediately start readjusting a little bit then. And the next one would be tax the polluter. So make the polluter, well, maybe not tax, make the polluter pay for the full cost of what's being produced. So from taking it out the ground, to transporting it, to making it, to giving it to us, to packaging it, and then to recycling it, reusing it, or whatever, plus its carbon emissions, taking it out the atmosphere, get that product priced at exactly what it costs to the environment, and then you'll suddenly see a realignment and market forces. So, and then the other bits you mentioned, the next level down, more details on specific carbon taxes, carbon trading and things like that. But until you hit the exactly right target and deal with that number 1 issue of we're actually subsidizing the things that are killing us, we're not going to get anywhere.
Okay, on that relatively negative note.
Well, sorry, but it's about the only way you do it. We grip the metal by knowing the challenge and then come to action, and that's what we've got to do.
Yeah. Well, the way to do that is to join Marlow Energy Group if you're not a member already.
Definitely.
Yeah, spend your whole £10 for life membership. Well worth the investment. Right. Can I thank, first of all, Martin Fry for his excellent introduction and information. Secondly, Ed for all his assistance and all the additional information that he came along with. And can I thank everybody else for attending. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully we'll see you at the QBot robot thing in 2 or 3 weeks' time. Thank you for coming.